Today we have a ton of NHL news and some trade rumors to take a look at here today. In the trade rumor front, we're taking a look at the Calgary Flames, Montreal Canadiens, Vancouver Canucks, Minnesota Wild, as well as the Chicago Blackhawks and a few others. We also have an update on the Toews Chychrun trade. What's the holdup? Is it happening with LA or not? We have an update as well from the NHLPA, their new leader. Some injury updates, a signing in Detroit, and a bunch of other news as well. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a ton of news today. Let's get right in and get started. First up, when it comes to the waiver wire, there's nobody on waivers today. Normally, I wouldn't even take a moment to mention that, but it was widely expected that Oilers forward Puljujarvi would be on waivers today, so that forward Kyle Yamamoto could be returning to the roster to play tomorrow for the Oilers. At this point, we see reports from Edmonton journalists like Ryan Rishaug and a few others that cover the Oilers saying that Puljujarvi was not on the ice for practice and he wasn't seen at the rink. So we don't know where he is. So there's some were speculating in trade. Rishaug dug into it as well and found out that there was no trade that was imminent that he could find out. So we don't know what's happening. Then head coach Jay Woodcroft did confirm that Yamamoto would return tomorrow. And really there's no flexibility cap-wise or roster-wise to bring Yamamoto in without somebody going out. And from a cap perspective, and a lot of people suspect that Puljujarvi would be the player that would have to either go on waivers and be demoted, claimed, traded, something to that effect. That's not happening. It did indicate a roster move of some sort was coming. We don't know what that is at this point, so stay tuned. By the time this makes it to YouTube in a couple of hours' time, I may know the answer to that question, and I'll update the information in the pinned comment. I may put out a short video later, just kind of confirming and updating that as well, so stay tuned. The NHL did put out a statement today regarding regional sports network issues with Bally Sports and their parent company, Diamond Sports Group, which are going to be expected to go through a bankruptcy. They're having a lot of debt issues. They've skipped a $140 million debt payment the other day, which is going to give them 30 days to kind of trigger a bankruptcy here. So the NHL met about this. I'll show you the quick statement that they put out, basically just saying that they're monitoring the situation and will react accordingly. But there's some legit concerns. There's a lot of teams that have regional rights packages with Bally Sports. Of course, Bally Sports is formerly Fox Sports. It's changed over the years, but still, they're struggling, and they're not going to be able to likely pay all of their broadcast rights fees to these NHL teams. So based on my research, it looks like I think there's about 14 NHL teams, and all based in the United States, of course, that have regional rights packages and air games on Bally Sports, and they could be at risk to not get all or some of their broadcast rights. So it's hard to say what's going to happen. I know they also have rights packages with other professional sports. I know MLB put out some information. They're saying essentially they'd like to see all of the money owed to them paid, of course, but they may be looking to see if they can kind of take back some games, maybe resell them to another broadcaster to make money that way. But they're probably not going to be able to do it at the same kind of rate, not this late in the game. So it's a real concern, because if these teams don't get all of their TV rights money, that obviously impacts the revenue, which obviously impacts the salary cap. So we'll have to monitor the situation closely. At this point, Diamond Sports Group is saying it's business as usual. Doesn't mean they're all going to completely fold. It could end up with a bankruptcy restructuring, perhaps, or maybe some of these local regional stations may not survive. I don't know how they're going to go about things, but it's a concerning situation that the NHL is keeping a close eye on. A few injury updates before we go into tonight's action. The Florida Panthers are going to be without Sam Bennett. Colin White's going to draw back into the lineup. Bennett is injured. Got hurt in the last game. He's going to be out for at least tonight. We don't know anything further than that on his, I guess how long he may be out. Islanders forward Jean-Gabriel Pageau continues to be out. When he first missed their game a few days ago against the Ottawa Senators, it wasn't believed to be anything too serious, but now he's officially on IR, so he is going to be out for at least a few more games by the looks of things. Calgary Flames are getting back Rasmus Anderson, of course, who was injured in an odd scenario. We had heard back last week that Anderson was injured while they were in Detroit on a road trip. He was taking a scooter to go to dinner or something and ended up getting hit by a car. So he's been dealing with some injuries from that. He's medically cleared and expected to play tonight. The Boston Bruins are going to be without forward Jake DeBrusk yet again for a third straight game. I know back before The All-Star break, I believe it was, head coach Jim Montgomery had made comments saying that he'd be shocked if DeBrusk wasn't ready to go and, would miss time after the All-Star break. And now here we are, a third straight game afterwards. So certainly turned out to be more serious than he ever imagined, I guess. We'll see. The interesting scenario last night, the Arizona Coyotes defeated the Tampa Bay Lightning 1-0 in a shootout, which is not a common occurrence in the NHL nowadays, especially when these teams are so badly mismatched. I mean, the Coyotes near the bottom of the league. Tampa Bay's, of course, been a powerhouse for several years. Multiple times Stanley Cup winner in the last few years as well. But the former Lightning prospect goalie Connor Ingram was in goal to skip the start for the Coyotes, and he shut out his former team. I believe it was almost 4 years ago that there was, I'm not sure what had happened between the relationship between the Lightning and Ingram, but certainly they were not a fan of him, and they demoted him to the East Coast League, even though he was doing quite well in the American Hockey League, so he gets to go down on a lower level again. And then it wasn't long after that when Ingram eventually departed the organization. I believe he was in Nashville for a while before he ended up in Arizona, and it certainly got his career back on track. It was known that he was dealing with some issues as well, and I believe did seek some different assistance and is certainly doing much better now. So it's quite a story there for Ingram to shut out the powerhouse Lightning, and they had well over 40 shots. It was quite a performance last night. I know after the game, the Coyotes have actually had some decent success lately. Last 6-7 games, they've been doing some winning and playing well. And interviewing Clayton Keller after the game, he was asked about their team's recent success and said a few things, but those comments that I found intriguing and somewhat comical was that the GM probably isn't very happy. So just goes to show you that, I know Gary Bettman made a statement a while back at a media availability saying that NHL teams don't take at all. So if they don't, then why would a player make a comment like that? I'm sure that, from a business perspective, the players understand that they would rather, the management would rather have them lose and get a higher pick, right? But so players are not wired that way. They're competitive people. They want to salvage, the best possible results for their own careers, for the team they want to win. That's just how athletes and competitive people are wired, in my opinion. But anyway, it's just thought it was an interesting quote. The Detroit Red Wings have signed defenseman Olli Maatta for a 2-year contract extension, $3 million average annual value. He came into Detroit on a short-term deal, trying to kind of resurrect his career. Maatta's run into issues, I guess, a couple of times. He played, obviously, at Pittsburgh for a long time, was in the LA Kings for a while. Seems to have some, good seasons, and then he kind of falls back. But he always seems to find a way to eventually kind of pull himself back up and play better. As I think you could describe him probably as a pretty steady third pair defenseman, as a pretty good value for what he brings to the table. And Maatta will remain in Detroit for at least a few more years. I know he was a name out there that teams were reporting to show interested as a depth defenseman pick up by the NHL trade deadline if he was available, but of course that's not going to be the case. Former NHL head coach and assistant coach, longtime lifer of the game, Marc Crawford, who's now working as a head coach over in the Swiss League for the Zurich Lions, is under investigation for a homophobic slur in a recent game. There is video footage of this that you could hear. He's yelling at an official, yelling at the ref, obviously on a call that he wasn't happy with. And we'll see where that goes. Certainly not, a good thing at all for Crawford to be dealing with, but certainly based on the video footage, it does sound like he definitely went too far with the berating of the official, but I'm not sure we'll see a suspension or fine or how that's all going to play out. Be curious to see with all the changes we've seen in the world and how things are handled in this regard. I'd be curious to see how they go about things in that regard. The NHLPA has finally officially announced that Marty Walsh will be taking over as a new executive director of the Players Association. He's not going to be effective until the middle of March is when he's going to start his role. Obviously, he'll have to remove himself from the government position that he holds with the federal U.S. government right now. Of course, like I said before, there's a lot to like, but there's certainly some things to be concerned about as well. Clearly, the committee that kind of went after Walsh being the top contender for this job, I guess did a good job along with himself in selling him as the, why he should be the new leader of the PA. Obviously, Mary Walsh has a long background in unions and things like that, negotiating. So, there's a lot of experience there that I think will really benefit and be a good thing. But of course, he was also the former mayor of Boston. So there's certainly connections there to Bruins ownership, the Jacobs family. They had supported his political campaign. So, of course, you're on the player side now and you have connections to the owner side. When you have relationships and things like that, there's certainly, I guess you could say, concern of a conflict there. So, I mean, clearly they moved past any of those concerns. I'm sure at some point they were brought up, but that's the story on him. Like I said, all that aside, just from an experience standpoint, and everything like that, it does sound like he'd be a good fit. And we knew from the get-go that the PA was not necessarily hung up on having somebody who's been involved in the game of hockey as as their main business and core of their life here, that they're willing to go outside of the hockey world to find somebody who could be the best for the role. So we'll see where things get started once we have him officially in the role of March. What kind of direction we'll see them take in that front. Onto the trade section of the video, we have a variety of rumors today from the new 32 Thoughts blog from Elliotte Friedman, some from Frank Saravalli, and others from around the league. One thing on Jacob Chychrun, which we've been kind of waiting for this guy to be traded, I know, forever now and a day, but at the same time where he was recently held out of action back, what is that now, 5-6 days ago, or whatever it was, he's still not traded. The Kings and Coyotes were confirmed by many NHL reporters and insiders to be close to a deal. Never happened. What Friedman's reporting is kind of the hang-up here. What we know now is that it seems like the Coyotes didn't want to take any more money back in a contract than what Chychrun was making. So we know that the LA Kings were reportedly, I know the first news, when the news first broke, it was reported that they may have offered Brandt Clarke a first-round pick. Well, that was denied. Clarke is not being traded. They made sure Clarke was aware he wasn't a part of any kind of situation where any deals that they were going to make. Same with Quinton Byfield, the former number 2 overall pick a couple of years back as well after Alexis Lafreniere in the 2020 NHL draft. But at this point, it was believed that it was going to be, a high-quality prospect, a first-round pick, probably some, an NHL contract going back. A lot of people suspected it might be Cal Petersen. Obviously, Cal Petersen's contract longer term might be a problem for the Coyotes. And there was some speculation that even their goalie, Vejmelka, could be included in going with Chychrun as well. Of course, that seemed to complicate the deal. So I know Friedman reported that. I've seen Frank Saravalli talk about this as well, that there was some belief that there was interest, but putting him in the package with Chychrun just made things too complicated, and it wasn't likely the case before things got hung up and stalled out here. But it seems that the big hang-up is that the Arizona Coyotes, not that they're not willing to take money back, they just don't want to take in more money, more term than what Chychrun has, and that seems to be the hold-up. So I'm not sure if they'll be able to overcome that or how LA will proceed, but it makes sense that LA would want to have a decent-sized contract off the books, and they don't really have much in the way of what you'd call bad contracts. The Cal Petersen one's one I'm sure they have regret on is not working out for them, so I can understand why that might have been one that was, something that they wanted to include. On to some other trade rumors, though. The latest on Jonathan Toews. I know Frank Saravalli is reporting that his latest trade bait board that he just put out a few hours ago, that the Hawks captain, is there even much interest in him to be traded? The last number of weeks, he's been out with an illness. Nobody seems to know what this illness is. All we've heard is that it's not related to what he dealt with before, which kept him out for an entire season. We've heard it's not COVID-related, but we don't really know. He's been missing for some time with very little updates or information from the team, so we don't really know in that regard. You combine that with the fact that he wasn't having a great season. It looks like he's lost a step, and Frank Saravalli is wondering, is there even much interest? Even if he comes back and is feeling better before the deadline and says to the Blackhawks that he'll agree to waive his no-trade clause for certain teams, is there even interest? It makes you wonder. So could the Blackhawks captain remain with Chicago, finish things out, reevaluate in the offseason? Considering the amount of time he's missed due to illness, I do honestly have some legit concerns over the long-term future of him as an NHL player, but without knowing further details, that's really hard to say. But he's certainly, a fraction of what he once was, unfortunately. But like I said, Father Time is undefeated and gets the best of all of us at some point. And Jonathan Toews seems to be feeling that right now. And so from a health perspective, at least, regardless of when he plays or where he plays or if he continues to play or not, that health-wise, he gets things sorted out. And, quality of life is good for him, hopefully. A few other updates as well. Elliotte Friedman's reporting from his latest blog post today that whether it happens now before the NHL trade deadline or into the offseason, the Minnesota Wild are definitely very interested in finding a fresh start for forward Jordan Greenway. He's certainly a player that they've considered moving. I know they've been linked to a player like Brock Boeser, who we're going to talk about further momentarily, and Greenway's name was brought up. The Wild seem like an unlikely team to have successfully completed Boeser trade, you could say, because of the cap situation that they're dealing with. The interest is real and legit on both sides. Greenway could be a piece going to Vancouver that would make sense, but it just seems unlikely because of Boeser's contract that it would be too difficult for them to pull off. So we're not expecting that, but he could go somewhere else. There's plenty of other teams. He doesn't make a ton of money. He's got big size. He's a huge guy. Came in of, when he was drafted, the U.S. program and college system, with a lot of potential. And so I'll be curious to see where he ends up. But it's definitely a player Minnesota wants to move on from and find a fresh start. Back to Brock Boeser now, you could say that the Canucks are definitely interested in trading him and would like to get it done before the deadline, not until the offseason, according to Frank Saravalli. Frank says that they're willing to retain some money on his contract, somewhere around the $1 million or so dollars, maybe somewhere between 1 to 1.2, which I know we had heard reports before that they might retain somewhere around 20-25% or something along those lines. And that they might do that to help facilitate things. A couple of teams that Frank mentions as being potential landing spots for Boeser include the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Washington Capitals. He does mention, like I said, the Minnesota Wild having interest, but due to the cap gymnastics, seems unlikely. Calgary, I know we're going to talk a lot about here in the last few minutes. Another team that's been interested and had some mentions, but I'm not sure it's going to work as well. But certainly, like he mentions, the fact that Jim Rutherford's traded for Kasper Kapanen. He's been involved in a lot of deals with this player. Maybe Kapanen, who's been long overdue getting a fresh start out of Pittsburgh, could go the other way to Vancouver. I don't think it would have to be 1-for-1. I think it would have to be Kapanen plus something else. But still, because of their expiring contracts of Zucker and Dumoulin, who they may not re-sign in Pittsburgh in the offseason, Frank feels that Boeser could be a good fit there longer term, and you put him on a top 6 role either with Malkin or Crosby, which I think Malkin would be more likely. It could rejuvenate him, get him playing in a role that is a good fit, right? So we'll see where things go in Brock Boeser. But according to Saravalli, they're very motivated trying to get this done before the deadline as well. So we'll have to see. A few things around the Calgary Flames. Allred Freeman did mention that they're certainly looking for a forward, like a preferred winger, who can open up some space for Jonathan Huberdeau to create. Now, we know Huberdeau is one of the league's top playmakers, but hasn't really had a great season so far in Calgary. You can say he's had a tough time adjusting and fitting in with his new teammates to some degree. Mentions Anthony Duclair, of course. Duclair was, he didn't play in Florida for a super long period of time, so Huberdeau was successful in Florida long before Duclair showed up. You could say that obviously playing with Barkov was a great help to that, but obviously Duclair did have an impact on that same thing that he's mentioning here, because Duclair certainly is a speedy guy, not afraid to play physical, and maybe he could be a guy who could come in from Florida, who has familiarity with playing with Huberdeau, who could be that fit in Calgary. We know the Flames have been looking for a top 9 forward for some time. They've yet to figure it out. They've had Jacob Pelletier recently, who I think has done an okay job, and certainly, for his first taste of NHL action, I think it's fair to say he's doing just fine, but they'd likely want to upgrade to somebody more experienced to try to make sure they get in the playoffs, have a chance to do some damage in the playoffs. Duclair could be that guy. We know the Florida Panthers obviously are very likely going to make a deal. Right now, they sit outside of the playoffs. They could become sellers. I don't think they'll be mass sellers, though. But between Reinhart, Duclair, and Bennett, it's quite expected that one of them goes because of the cap situation that they face themselves with. There's just not enough room for everybody to stay, and that it's unless they have some kind of weird scenario where somebody gets hurt, goes on LTIR or something to that effect, that we could see that, and that Duclair could find himself on the move when he's ready to come back. Instead of playing with Florida, maybe he goes somewhere else. It's hard to say. Calgary could be a landing spot for him. And the Flames, I also want to touch on another possibility here. Derek Dreger on a recent podcast was talking about how the Flames and Brad Treliving have had a long interest in Habs forward Josh Anderson. Now, we've heard numerous times, and I've talked about it here as well, that the Montreal Canadiens do not want to trade Josh Anderson, but I think it's fair to say that anybody can be traded And if any team comes back with an offer that a team just can't refuse, then they're going to have to seriously consider it. Now, some don't really understand the long fascination with Anderson in Calgary, citing the fact that his contract's not the greatest, and overall, yes, he has value, but is he really that good that they should be that fascinated with him? Personally, I think I understand the attraction to some degree. I mean, he's a big, strong guy, a north-south player. You could call him to some degree a one-trick pony. He could be a good goal scorer, not much of a playmaker, not the greatest defensively. Certainly has his flaws, but there's certainly things to like as well. And, you know, there's some that think that he could be a good fit there. Now, of course, like I said, though, Montreal's not going to trade him without getting their socks knocked off to the point that they can't just say, okay, we can't refuse this. Darren Dreger was asked on this Flames-based podcast, what do you think that would be for the Calgary Flames to call up Montreal and Kent Hughes and to ask about Josh Anderson? What would they have to offer to make them be like, okay, we have to seriously consider this and maybe get a deal done? And he said probably offering, starting with Jacob Pelletier and probably putting in a first-round pick, maybe something else. That's an awfully steep price, in my opinion, for Josh Anderson and the contract that comes with them. Now, if I'm Montreal and I'm offered Jacob Pelletier and a first-round pick, I'd probably take that trade every day of the week, in my opinion. That's just me. Obviously, some value Anderson might more than I do. I mean, I like the player. I don't know if I like him enough to pass up that offer, though. You know, we'll see where that goes. But interesting to note just how long and deep the interest in Anderson goes with Tree Living and the Calgary Flames. I'm not convinced he's exactly what they need, but they could certainly use another goal-scoring forward. That is for certain. Of course, he'd have familiarity with some guys on that team, like Tyler Toffoli, who we played with in Montreal as well. You know, these two teams have made trades before. I don't know that this is going to be something that we see, because I don't know that Calgary's going to go down that road to offer that kind of package. But be interesting to note if they did. My question to you, especially if you're a Habs fan, if you're the GM Kent Hughes and you're offered Jacob Pelletier, a first-round pick, and anything else might go with it, are you taking that deal for Josh Anderson? Let me know your thoughts on all of today's news or rumors down in the comments, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.